Hey guys, Richard Holdner here, and welcome to the channel. I got a question for you. Who wants to see a comparison between a Vortec centrifugal supercharger and twin turbos run on a Junkyard 454? Everybody, right? This video has two of my favorite things. It has a Junkyard motor and it has boost. And not only one kind of boost, but two kinds of boost. It's always very cool to compare the boost and power curves offered by a centrifugal supercharger with those from a turbo. So why am I still talking here? Let's get to the results.
To illustrate the difference in boost and power curves offered by a Vortec centrifugal supercharger and twin turbos run on a 454 big block Chevy, we obviously needed a 454 big block Chevy. In this case, this was a late model Gen 6 454 from the wrecking yard. All we did was upgrade it with head studs and new gaskets. We also replaced the factory camshaft and removed the factory fuel injection, replaced it with a simple carburetor. So here's what we did on the big block to get it ready for testing under boost. We installed a Comp Extreme Marine camshaft. It was a 284, so it was a 547 lift, 230, 236 degree duration split, and 112 degree lobe separation angle. We reused the factory lifters. We installed a valve spring upgrade on it with rotator eliminators. We used the stock bolt down rockers and stuff. We also installed an Edelbrock RPM air gap and a 750 Holly on it, and then ran a set of dyno headers. And we ran the thing NA, obviously, before we installed either one of our forced induction combinations. So run naturally aspirated our cammed 454 big block, basically, and carbureted, produced 427 horsepower and 476 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened after we added our Vortec supercharger. So what we did was install a supercharger kit that included a Vortec YSI supercharger, so it was capable of supporting more than 1,000 horsepower easily. We obviously didn't run it up that high on this. We equipped it with a cog pulley setup to eliminate belt slippage, and it was a 32-tooth cog blower pulley and an 80-tooth crank pulley. And here's what happened when we installed our Vortec. We also ran this with an 850 CSU dedicated blow-through carburetor and bonnet. There was no intercooler run on it at this time, although we did. That will be the next modification that we made. And this thing produced a lot of boost. It was over 17 or 18 pounds, I think, with this pulley combination. If you take a look down here, we produced 785 horsepower. Make that 788 horsepower, and peak torque checked in at 714 foot-pounds. The stuff down here going on below 3,500, that was just a matter of the tune. We didn't take a whole bunch of time to tune that load-in part, but everywhere else the air fuel was good. And this was on about 21 degrees of total timing. And we set that with just by turning the MSD distributor. But here's an interesting thing that happened. We also added an air-to-water intercooler on this. And if we take a look, we did measure some air temperatures while we were doing this test. So we measured the air temperature under the carburetor with the non-intercooled combination, and it was about 120 degrees. The air coming out of the blower was 251 or 2 degrees, and then we added an air-to-water intercooler using dyno water, and we picked up quite a bit of power. The peak power was up to 848 horsepower. Peak torque was up as well to 760 foot-pounds. The boost actually dropped slightly because of the intercooler, both from temperature and possibly as a small restriction, but it's primarily probably because of the change in charge temperature. So it just goes to show two things. One, that obviously running a blow-through on a Junkyard motor works very well. And also that even on a carbureted application, when you're blowing through, which does have charge cooling from the carburation, running an intercooler even on a carbureted blow-through application still adds power, as we see here, because we didn't change the boost. In fact, the boost went down slightly. We also did not change the timing. This actually worked out very well. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we ran the same combination with turbos.
In addition to running the Vortec supercharger, we also ran our Junkyard 454 Gen 6 motor with the cam with a pair of turbos. In this case, it was a pair of S475 Borg-Warner turbos. They were T4s. And the turbos were capable of near 1,000 horsepower piece, but again, that's almost twice as much as, it was way more than we would be using on any of these combinations, but there's more than enough turbo to support this kind of power level. We also ran it with custom exhaust manifolds, basically turbo headers that ended in 3-inch V-bands. The guys, Jason over at JT Fab did these up for us, and we also did our normal 2-in, one single out, dual core air to water intercooler from CX Racing. We ran the same blow through CSU carburetor with the twin turbos that we ran on the VORTEC application. But this was our NA motor, 427 horsepower and 476 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened when we added our twin turbo kit. I'll go ahead and put a photo up here so you guys can kind of see what it looked like. We started out running about 9 pounds. We're going to talk about the boost curves after we compare these to the VORTEC. But we ran these just like you always do with any turbo application at different boost levels. So we started out around 9 pounds with the twin turbos, which was easy for these things. We are up at 700 and more than 30 horsepower and 764 foot-pounds of torque. So we turn the boost up a little bit more, around 11 pounds. Just under 790 horsepower, 821 foot-pounds, and then finally in the 12-pound range, 830 plus horsepower and 866 foot-pounds of torque. You can see we didn't rev it as high on the VORTEC. The VORTEC has a rising boost curve, so as we rev it more, it tends to make peak power higher, and the boost keeps going up because it has a rising boost curve, so it artificially changes where the thing wants to make peak power. This was getting near the power peak as we had a nice flat boost curve, and we'll see what the boost curve is, and we'll compare the VORTEC to the turbos to show you where they were making boost and where they were making power. But as you can see, both of them these were over 800 horsepower on both of them, and they both did very well. The turbos in this case, the twin S475s were way oversized for what we needed. In fact, we could make this power with a single S475. It's just that the kit was set up to accept two, and this is the kit that we will eventually use when we do a Big Bang 454, Big Bang Junkyard 454 to find out how much power we can make. The one thing that was concerning us here is this thing was making more torque than it was making horsepower, and for the Big Bang test, when we eventually do that, we don't really want that to be the case. We actually want this thing to make a lot more horsepower than torque. So we're trying to get the motor to rev out higher, because this Junkyard motor will probably eventually be the Big Bang version that we use, because we have a couple of the Junkyard 454s that we have available, because whenever I go to the wrecking yard, I like picking those up. It's always nice to have a couple spare big blocks. But again, the torque peak is way too early for this to be the Big Bang one, because we'd like peak power to occur at like 6,500 RPM and then have a rising boost curve, and that's something we'll be able to do with the TC1 electronic controller, where we'll reference it to RPM, so maybe we'll only have 4 or 5 pounds here, and then we'll have peak boost out at the top, much like the Centrifugal does. So now that we've taken a look at our turbo application on our Junkyard 454, let's compare the turbo and the VORTEC and see how they compare. Now that we've looked at them individually, let's take a comparison between the VORTEC supercharged Junkyard 454 and the turbo version. And this is our VORTEC version with the intercooler, making 848 horsepower and 761 foot-pounds of torque. And here's a comparison between the VORTEC and the highest boost level that we ran with the turbo setup. That made 833 horsepower, but 866 foot-pounds of torque, and that's in red. So you can see they made similar power. They were within 15 horsepower. We revved the VORTEC out a little bit farther. The torque was dramatically different, and we'll see why when we take a look at the boost curves between the two, that the VORTEC had a rising curve and the turbo was much flatter. It had all the boost that it needed at the torque peak, so it was able to make a lot more torque. And that's kind of the differences we've seen time and time again in this on this channel when we compare these centrifugal blowers to the turbos on almost all these applications. That's usually what happens, is that we have a big change in the boost curve. So here are the power curves between the two. They both make a ton of power, and you might have problem putting traction down anyway with the turbo combination at 866 foot-pounds. But let's compare the boost curves now. We can do that really quickly here. And you can kind of see why the power curves are shaped the way they do. So this is our Vortec run. We started out at a little over 4 pounds and rose to a peak of over 17 pounds. And here's the high boost run on the turbo kit. You can see the boost is quite a bit lower on the turbos. So the turbos are a bit more efficient. They don't have the drive parasitic losses associated with driving the supercharger, so it was able to make a fair bit more power. In honesty, the boost on the Vortec number seems a little high. I don't normally see this kind of difference with a similar, power number. The Vortec made about 15 more horsepower, but still, it seems like a big difference between the two. But I just wanted to show you the difference in the boost curves. We have a rising boost curve basically with the Vortec, whereas once these twin S475s, which again were overkill for this application, but once they spooled up, we had a fairly nice flat boost curve dictated by our electronic boost controller, and that's normally the way that turbo stuff works out. So this is usually the difference, and even if they were the same peak number, the turbo will just have a lot more average boost production basically than a centrifugal will, and it will usually have a lot more average power down low. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, what do we learn in this little adventure comparing our centrifugal supercharger to the turbos on our Junkyard big block 454? Well, the first thing is, first of all, it's a Junkyard 454, so it's already awesome. Then it's a cammed Junkyard mode, even more awesomer. Then it's a cammed Junkyard 454 with boost, so that's the most awesomest. And really, it doesn't matter if you've got a Junkyard 454 with a cam in it and springs, and you apply boost. It doesn't really matter what you select. You can use a centrifugal blower, turbos, a roots blower, or a twin screw blower. All of that is good because there's nothing better than having a boosted big block, especially if it originally came from a Junkyard. Heck, you can even run nitrous. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing.